So welcome to the second part of creating artificial neural networks in Python from scratch. And after the first part, where we have created what we call the core, so where we created a layer of neurons, a dense layer, activation function, the softmax layer, and an optimizer, we now want to move on and to create a convolution neural network. And before starting with the actual programming, of course, I want to explain what convolution actually is, what it means, and why do we need that. Then I want to introduce you different pooling layers, different pooling mechanisms, and of course explain why we need them. We also have to talk about activation functions again. Then a method or a kind of layer that's called flattening layer. And of course, then after we've done with this part, we have to implement the backpropagation for all those different layers. So we have to talk about backpropagation again. And at the end, of course, we want to test our convolution neural network. And I also want to make a few final remarks about the training process, particular biases you can have and things you have to be aware of. So therefore, let us now start with the convolution part. And let me explain what convolution actually is. So what we have now is essentially the core of the most of the ANN. So we have a dense layer, we have an activation layer, we have a softmax layer if we want to calculate probabilities, and we have an optimizer. And we are also going to use that later once we have the convolution part. So half of that is already done. And we can just start building our convolution neural network based on those building blocks that we have already. And I also want to summarize what we did in the first lecture. So essentially, we have a matrix containing numbers. So it's a numerical matrix or a numerical array. And we feed this into our ANN. And the ANN has all those weights and the biases, and these are all the learnables. And at the end, after it's been trained and after it's been trained well, ideally, it gives us the correct predictions. For example, in the case that we had in the first lecture, that we have different coordinates from our different data points, and they have different categories: blue data points, red data points, and black data points. And we trained our neural network accordingly, and then we have this classification problem. So it was a classification problem. That's why we needed the softmax layer for calculating the probabilities. So what we want to do now is that we still have matrices, but this time it's images. And in the first part, the input of the matrices was just the coordinates of our data points in the n-dimensional feature space. So every row corresponded to a data point and every column to one of those coordinates. What we have now is images. And of course, these are, again, still matrices with numerical values. But of course, it's a bit different. So now it's not that every row is a data point. Now we have pixel with different pixel values. And they're also spatially connected because that's what makes up an image. So we cannot just treat all these pixels separately because, for example, we have some pixel that resemble or form the eye that you see here in the cat, or the ear, or the paws, or something like that. So you cannot really just treat all those pixel values separately. So you have to take into account that it's somehow spatially related, and also somehow we have to build a network that understands what is the actual object of interest, what is background, or what are different objects. So somehow we have to take this information, put this into our ANN, and if we want to categorize those different images, the output should be like, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is something else. So if we have a classification problem. So mathematically, it's the same problem. However, the question is, how do we take our input, which is different now, and prepare it for our ANN? And this is actually the main part of this lecture. So the question is, what happens in between? We have our input, and how do we put it into our ANN? And there are different questions. So first of all, what I showed in the last slide was that we have different images, and we want to categorize those different images. So do you see a cat, a dog, a bird, or anything else? But you can do the same thing actually within an image. So for example, in this image, that is just one image, but you can have different categories in the image. For example, you have just background, then you have trees, then you have a street light, you have the street itself, and a cyclist or a person, for example. For example, if you want to have a car that drives autonomously, should be able to distinguish between the different objects. That is a pedestrian, for example. This is a street sign and should be able to read the street sign and interpret everything. So you have still a problem of categorization or classification, but not between different images, it's within an image. So we have different objects within an image. And ideally, after some training, the neural network is able to distinguish between the different objects you have in the image. So that's what I show here on the right-hand side of the slides. It's still the same problem. So we have to assign probabilities to different pixel according to the different classifications. And this is called semantic segmentation. So mathematically, it's still the same problem, but it's categorizing or classifying pixel within an image and not between different images. It requires a slightly different architecture, but still it's the same problem. So what do we do in between? So how do we take this information and put this into our ANN? And also here, kind of the reverse process, how do we assign then those categories to the different pixel? And what I showed you was like some standard images where we have 3 colors, RGB. So that corresponds to 3 channels. So it's a 3-dimensional matrix with 3 channels. So you have XY coordinates, for the X and Y coordinates for the different pixel, but you also have different pixel values according to different color channels. But it doesn't need to be just 3 color channels. So for example, when you have satellite images like those I show here, it could be also infrared, and also not only one infrared channel, could be 3 or 4 different infrared channels, could be UV, even could be X-ray with different energy levels. So for example, I once worked with images from X-ray telescopes, space telescopes, and they had different X-ray channels. So the number of channels is not necessarily restricted to 3. It can be actually any number. So this matrix can have an arbitrary number of dimensions if you wish. So in principle, we can have n color channels, and also those color channels are kind of related because you might have different information and different channels you probably don't see in other channels. And I will want to show you one example. So again, we have the same problem. We have those images, and we have to feed our images into our neural network. And of course, we have to train the network, and then we want to have desired output. Another example is warfare, for example, when you have drones, and drones, for example, take images of tanks, what you can see here. It has to identify those tanks. Then it can even suggest what to do with those tanks. So are they friendly tanks, enemy tanks? If they're enemy tanks, what is an appropriate action to do? In principle, a drone could do this completely alone. So identifying those objects, then just selecting the proper actions, so to say, and just do what it thinks is right. And of course, still there has to be a human pushing the actual button, but in principle, those drones are completely independent and they can do this completely independently. But it's still the same problem. So mathematically, we have still the same problem. We have an image. We can also have a video. So this is like a higher dimensional image, if you like. Then you have time as another dimension. But it's mathematically still the same problem. So we have to take into account that pixels are spatially related to each other, and we have to maintain this information. So still the same question, how do we do that? And how do we feed the information into our network? So that was all classification, but in principle, you could also do or use this network then for a regression problem. So think about images that are turned upside down, and you want to write a code that first of all understand that an image is being turned upside down and turns it back to according to the correct angle. So the output then would just be the angle the image has to be turned, so that the network learns in which direction it has to turn this particular image. So we have just one output value, and it's just a numerical value. So that's a particular regression problem. So maybe you know these recapture questions where you have to turn an image in the right angle. So I tried this once with one of those images, and after, I don't know, like less than 200 images or so, that was enough as a training sample that the network understood how it has to turn this image in the right way and the correct angle, and in principle was able to pass the recapture. So that's actually a relatively simple problem. But this is an example of regression. So it doesn't have to be just a classification problem. Of course, it also can be a typical regression problem. But again, you still have to answer the question how to put these images into our network, how to digest it, so to say, that we can create information that is, or that we can extract information that's important, and how to pass it on to the dense layer so that the whole machinery then runs. So that's the question, how is it possible? And at the end, we want to create an image network that is in principle capable of telling cats from dogs or whatever you want to have. Can be any other object. So that's kind of the goal of this lecture. And as I showed already earlier, so an image is nothing but an ND matrix, or actually 3D matrix with different channels. And let's stick to an ordinary RGB image where we have 3 different channels, but it's a 3D matrix. And maybe you have Googled for convolutional networks already, and you probably found that these images have to be an input for a so-called convolution layer, and there are probably also max pool layers, and maybe there's another convolution layer. So it could be a sequence of many convolution layers. Then there's a flattening layer, and then at the end we put it into the dense layer. So this is when you just Google that, you will see that's the rough structure of such a convolution neural network. And in our different chapters, we will go through all these different layers, so convolution, different pooling layers, and also the flattening layer, and also explain what they do, of course, and what the purpose is. So let's start with the first part. What is actually convolution and why do we need that? Also here, you can just Google and we'll find an article on Wikipedia, and that will give you this equation. And this equation, so if you're not a mathematician, it doesn't tell you a lot. And I want to explain what this equation actually means and how is it related to our problem. So in principle, if you look at this, so the definition of convolution is the following. So we have an image, which is denoted F. Then you multiply this with a filter, I want to denote as G. And then you integrate over coordinates in Rn space, so R just real numbers, and that gives you a value. So that's the definition of convolution. In our case, we have discrete values and discrete pixel. So this integral is actually a sum. So we're going to multiply values, pixel values we have in the image, with some values we have in the filter, whatever this filter is, and then we sum up those values. So that's what the recipe, first of all, tells us. What does it look like in practice? So we have our image, and as I said, we have different pixel values. We have X and Y coordinates, then we have these different pixel values. So in every little data point here in the grid, there's just a pixel value. And now there's a filter, and the filter usually is a lot smaller than the actual image. And then convolution says, we just multiply the filter, which is called kernel, with our image, and then we sum up all those values. So we multiply this, and for example, the different ways how to do that. So you have your filter, and you could start with the upper left of the image so that the overlap is just 1 pixel. So you multiply a value, the pixel value of the filter, to the pixel value in the image. That's just 1 value, so if you sum it up, it's still the same value. And this is the new value for the convolved image. And this is what you see on the left-hand side of the equation. So that's the new value of the convolved image. And in principle, you can just go on with that. So for example, what you see here, then the overlap is 3 pixels. So you multiply each pixel value, that's what the equation says, and then you just sum it up, that's the integral, and then you have a new value for the new convolved image. And that's it. So it's multiplying the pixel values from the image and the kernel element-wise, and then summing those values up. That's the integral. So, and then you just continue and until you went through all the different pixel values in the image and finally have your convolved image. So again, the filter is often called kernel, and then you just continue with all these different steps, and you see already there are different techniques how to do it actually. So for example, you can just do it and start in the upper left, and the overlap is just 1 pixel. So you have 1 pixel value for the convolved image. And then you just continue with a certain step size, let's say 1 pixel each. But you can also start in a different way. So for example, you can start your filter where there's no overlap at all. So where it just fits right in the upper left corner, like in this case. And then you have a pixel value for all those 9 values, because according to the equation, you multiply every pixel value element-wise. So the pixel value from the filter with the pixel value in the image, everything element-wise. We have 9 values in this case, 3 times 3. And then you sum up all those values, that gives you 1 value, which is the pixel value here. And then you can take the next step, and the step size can be larger. So it's not necessarily only 1 pixel like in the above example. It can also be a 3 pixel like in this case, which is just the size of the filter. So the step size or the stride length can be different. So then you have the second pixel value in the convolved image for the second set of 9 pixel values. So for every set of 9 pixel values, you have 1 new pixel value, which of course reduces the size of the output image. So you have these different methods and these different techniques, and the step, so the step size here that you saw, that's called the stride length. So for example, in the example in the bottom, you see that the stride length is 3, so it's just 3 pixel. And the overlap that you see here, that's called padding. So for example, in the first example, we have padding 2 and stride length 1. And the second example, we have padding 0 because there's no overlap, and the stride length is 3 pixel. So if you do the math, so according to the filter size, or depending on the filter size, the padding and the stride length, the convolved image, so the resulting output image, can have a different size. And this is also something we're gonna take a look at then when we have our convolution. We want to play a bit with that when we have our codes. And we want to run our convolution for different padding and stride length, then also check what the size of the output image is compared to the input image. But the size of the output image is determined by the size of the image, of the input image, of course, the size of the filter, the padding, and the stride length. So you can, if you just think about how that works, you can derive this kind of equation easily. But this equation, of course, will be important then if we want to pre-allocate matrices, for example, in our convolution codes. So that's first of all the technique. So we multiply our kernel values with the pixel values in our image element-wise, sum those values up, and that's the new value for the new pixel value for the new convolved image. And depending on the technique, what the padding is and the stride length, the output image can have a different size. But what are those filters? So if you just, again, Google for that, you will see that there are lots of different convolution filters. So for example, here, this is just a set you find on different papers, also on Wikipedia. So every square here corresponds to a filter, and those pixel values are highlighted in grayscale. So white means 1, black means 0. So these are the filter values. And then you have all these different filters. And what is the purpose of those filters, first of all? So for example, let's take a relatively simple set of filters like those here. And again, if you do some research on Wikipedia or so, if you just Google convolution kernel or so, then you'll find filters that have this structure. So for example, all the values are 0 except the one in the center here. This is 1. Or you can have the diagonal being 1, everything else is 0. Or it's just the pixel value in the very center is 1 and everything else is 0. So if you run convolution, also just if you execute this integral, so to say, that you see here, and we will do this, we will write the code and play with the code a bit, then the resulting image looks like this. And every image looks a bit different. So in some cases, like in this image, for example, the foreground is very prominent and highlighted, like this one. In some cases, the edges are highlighted. In some cases, like diagonal, horizontal structures, vertical structures, and diagonal structures. So depending on which kind of filter you use for the convolution, it can highlight different features, different structures in your image. And that's important because you want to understand what is in the image in a sense. So which structures and which features are important, for example, for classifying this image. On this image, for example, there's a bridge, and which is very typical is that you have horizontal features, you have vertical features, you have 90-degree angles, which are very uncommon in nature. So this is something that would definitely define an artificial object, like a building or like this bridge in this case. And you can see in these different images, as a result from the different, as a result from the multiplication with different filters, you have different results and different features are highlighted. So if I look at those images here, those filters are probably responsible for telling an artificial structure like a building from the rest of the environment. This image on the right-hand side is from a filter where you can probably tell the background from the foreground. So you can detect the foreground image and distinguish it from background objects. And in this way, you can see how different filters can enhance different features in these different images in order to help understanding what is a unique feature for one particular object, and then thereby we can classify these objects. So these are the different filters. Here also again want to just highlight the image. Again, you see the vertical structures are really highlighted in the bridge here. So this filter highlights the vertical features in the image and so on. So we have these different filters and they're responsible for highlighting different features in the image. And based on this, it makes it easier to classify objects in the image. So and that's the overall idea. So we have these filters and they filter out relevant features which we need for classification. But the problem is, how do I know which features are relevant? And that's the overall idea of using a convolution neural network, because those filter values that we see here are learnables. So like the weights in the neurons in the dense layer, those convolution filter work as an actual neuron. And those filter values are equivalent to the weights. So the idea is that those filters are not given. So we start with a random set of numbers. And during the optimization process, the network is learning which of those features are relevant, and it changes the filter values accordingly. So the filter values are fully equivalent to the weights we had in our neurons before. And that's the whole idea. So we don't know which features are relevant in the first place. We have no idea, and we do not use fixed values for the filters. We just start with random values and let the network decide which features are important for classification, and therefore it determines and optimizes the filter weights accordingly. So that's the whole idea. And this is the main part of those convolution neural networks, and that's where the name comes from. So that's why they're called convolution neural network. We will build a network with only a few convolution filters, so 5, 7, maybe 9 different filters. More sophisticated convolution neural networks can have 100, 150 different filters. So that makes up the bulk part of the entire network. All right, so I hope it's now clear what convolution means and how it works, but we still, of course, want to take a look at the different filters and what happens if I take an image and apply different convolution filters and an image, so that we kind of get a feeling what a network then actually does and what convolution actually does. So that was the kind of theoretical part. And now we want to take a look at the actual convolution process by just writing some code with a particular image and take a look at the result. But in order to do so, we first have to understand how loading an image in Python works. And we want to explore those images. First of all, we want to understand what is structure of an image is, the array structure, and want to create some plots and want to display those images in Python. So I'm going to show you that. And then, of course, we want to apply different convolution filter, aka kernel, and also want to play a bit with those convolution filter and see what the result is. So we want to create a code that loads those images, displays the images, apply a convolution filter, and then also displays the convolved image. So let us first of all start with reading and displaying images in Python. So the library you can use is, again, matplotlib. And with PLT, with pyplot, you can read an image. So for example, let's read an image where you see a dog like this, and then you can display the image with imshow. So let's do that. And let's also explore the image and let's understand what this image actually means. So therefore, I want to just go to our user interface, and I prepared already something. So for example, let's read in the, to first of all call the library for matplotlib. And then I have a set of images. You can just download those images freely. If you just Google for that, they're freely. So these databases are usually freely available. And in our case, for example, I have images with cats and images with dogs. And you can see, first of all, it's 12,500 images each. So for cats and dogs, that gives you an idea of how large those databases have to be. And also, let's take a look at those images themselves. So for example, what is important? So you want to have a network then that it's relatively accurate and relatively reliable, telling you what you see on these images. So therefore, first of all, if you, like in our case, want to train a network that is able to distinguish cats from dogs, you should have all kinds of cats and all kinds of dogs with all different colors. You should have images with all different sizes, from weird angles. Some might even be blurred, because when you just take a random image with a cat, it should be able to tell this is a cat, this is a dog. And therefore, you need all these different kind of images so that the network learns which features are important. So for example, this image. So let me just open that. So this image, for example, even looks a bit blurred. So so like this image, so that's an image you would probably say this is not ideal, but you have to take those images and also use them in your training set. Because otherwise, a network would, for example, learn if it's not blurred, then this is this particular object, which is of course wrong, because the network is stupid. It doesn't know which features are important. So that's the reason why it's so important that you have that your data set you use for training reflects the entire diversity of images. So different sizes, for example, with different background objects. Also, that's a very important image because it shows a human, which is the main part of the image, but it's not the important part, right? The important part is the cat you see here on the left-hand side, which only makes up only a small part of the actual image. But it's important for the network that this is in the training set as well, because otherwise, if you have an image like this, which was not in the training, it does not understand, for example, that this is a person and that this person is irrelevant for determining where's the cat. I want to show you a few other examples. So what is also important that you have images where the actual object is just partly covered or obscured within the foreground object, like in this case, where the cat is in the cage, so that also the network understands, okay, it's still a cat, even though there are those bars and so on. Here's another example. So this is really important that you have all those images with all the weird angles, all also different kinds of cats, different colors. And for dogs, of course, which is more important, that you all also have the different breeds, so that you have different kind of dogs. Again, here you have our actual object next to another object. And for example, our network, if a network somehow figures out that our object of interest always has, for example, 2 eyes and a mouth, then it also would identify this baby, for example, as a dog. So therefore, you should also have an object with 2 eyes and a mouth, which is not a dog, that the network learns, okay, this is not a dog. This is just something else, probably a person, but this is not a dog, and so on. So the also here you have foreground objects again that partly cover the actual object. So this is really important. And usually those data sets also made in this way. So that reflects the entire diversity of all those different objects which are interesting in our case. Like this is another example. So really this really helps the network from understanding which features are actually important. There's actually more to that. So what you also do usually, and we don't do that, and I will also talk about this later a bit when it's relevant in the context. You also augment those images. That means when you you trained the network not just with this data set, but you also turn those images, cut out parts randomly, make them skewed, blur them randomly, and also put this into this image. Because it also could be that a photo was taken upside down, it's blurred from a weird angle again. So you kind of increase the size of your data set by augmenting, so by, as I said, turning it different randomly chosen angles, cutting out particular regions of the image and so on, and use this as a data set as well. So augmentation is very important. So this is very important. So it's not trivial to have a correct and reliable data set. And now, since we have our data set, let's first of all try to understand those images. So I just take one image here, and I want to display this image. So again, this is just a path. Then we have JPEG images. And then we want to read those images with PLT im read, and you can display those images with PLT im show. So you just take this image, and one of those keyword arguments, for example, is the color map. So you, for example, can use gray, and then we can display this image here. So let me just show this later. So gray here. First of all, it doesn't give you an error message. Why? Because it is a image, that's a color image, and it knows the color scale because it understands it's a 3-dimensional color image. And we can actually take a look at this. So we can, for example, say shape, and then you see it is an image that has 3 color channels. So it's a 3D object because it has rows and columns, and the Z coordinate is just 3 different color channels. So if you just say CMake gray and it's an RGB color coded image, it understands automatically, well, gray doesn't make sense here because I have a color image. So let's therefore take a look at these different channels. So for example, let's copy and paste the code here. And for example, let's say we want to have all rows, all columns, and let's say color channel 1. So it's an RGB color image. This would be red. And let's now take a look at this image. And since we have now choose the color map, it's in gray. And if I don't do that, did you see the difference? It just takes any arbitrary color scale. So let me just undo this. And now we have our image in red and in gray. So why is it not red, by the way? So let me just delete this here. So that's the original image. And this is that's the red color channel. But why is it not red? So why, if I, for example, just plot it like this without any color map, why is it not red? So here, why is it not red? Well, the thing is, now it has only one color channel. It doesn't know to which color it refers to. Because, of course, also the network doesn't know what color actually is. It just has different pixel values in different levels of our matrix, so to say. So therefore, the scale of the color is completely arbitrary. So you have just a 2D matrix in this case, and you don't know where it actually came from. So let me just do the same thing for the other color channels. So it's RGB, so this is green, and the other color channel consequently is blue. So I think you heard it already at some point that any color can be created out of a combination of these 3 basic colors, red, green, and blue. And depending on the pixel value, you can have any different color. And also we'll illustrate this a bit. So now we have these different color channels. So this is the blue one. So let me just redo that again so that we see all those different images. So we have, let me do this step by step. So we have the original image, then we have our image from the red, so the red color channel, the green color channel, and the blue color channel. So again, for the different channels themselves, you just have a matrix, and this matrix, of course, so the code doesn't know, or the program doesn't know, the computer doesn't know that's actually a color. So that's why we have to give a color map here. But we can tell already that the different channels contain different information. So again, this is the actual image. And for example, if we just go to this image, this is the red color channel. So the pixel values, which are large, they're displayed in white in the gray color map. And smaller pixel values are black. So therefore, if something is white in this particular color channel, then it's very prominent, this particular color channel. So for example, if you look at this leash here, it's white. So that means large pixel values in the red color channel. And if you just, for example, compare it to the green and the blue, so in the blue channel, you barely can see the leash. You see it a bit in the green color channel, but it's pretty bright in the red color channel. So this object must have the color red, and that's what you can see here. Let's take the pants in the background. So they're kind of grayish, dark gray in our red color channel. So they have low pixel values. In green, they have larger pixel values, and they're really bright in the blue color channel. That's what you can see here. They're really bright. So therefore, this object has a bluish color. And if you look at the original image, you can see the pants are blue. Then you have objects which are bright throughout the different color channels. So they are bright here, right here, and those objects are white. That's what you can see here in the shoes and the fur. And then, of course, you have also objects which have smaller pixel values throughout the different color channels. So they're dark, like here, this part is dark. This is dark in the green, and this is dark in the blue color channel. So if it's dark everywhere, that corresponds to the color black. And indeed, this part of the fur here is black. So that illustrates that already having these different color channels, you can extract different information. For example, when it's about detecting the leash, you see that definitely in the red color channel, it's pretty bright, whereas in the blue color channel, it completely disappears. So this is one thing you can already learn when you use these different color channels. And I've have been talking about pixel values quite a lot. So let's take a look at those pixel values first of all. So for example, let's create the image that only shows red. And then let's take a look at those pixel values. So it is an array, and it says integer 8, and it has different values. So first of all, it's 8-bit, and it's an integer. What is the maximum? What is the minimum? So for example, let's now load NumPy. And let's import NumPy now. Then we can say NPy max of our image red. It's 255. And what is the minimum? In this case, it's 12. In general, if you take the image, it should be 0. So maybe you have a value, this is 0. So the minimum value is 0, and the maximum value is 255. So what does it actually mean? So it says it's an 8-bit image. So a bit has 0 or 1 to the power of 8. Well, this is 256, and that's the exact number of different values we can have in our image. So from 0 to 255. That means for every color channel, so for red, green, and blue, we have 256 different values. So it goes from 0 to 255. So remember, any color can be created by a combination of those 3 colors. And just see it as a vector. So let's, for example, say that green and red and blue are like coordinate axis, x, y, z, and those values are quantized. So they go from 0 to 255 in integer numbers. So we have like different cubes, and every cube corresponds to an actual number. And this is the to an actual number, and also to an actual color. So and that's the number of colors you can actually have in this image. So again, it goes from 0 to 255 for every coordinate x. So just think about the volume. So you have 255 times 255 times 255. So it's actually 256 because you have it starts at 0. So we have 256 times 256 times 256. So this is the number of colors you can create with an 8-bit image. It's 16.8 million roughly. And so that means with an 8-bit image, you can create or display 16.8 million different colors. If you have like a 16-bit, then of course it's way more. So for example, let's do this again. So we have 2 to the power of 16. This is your number. And then, of course, you still have 3 coordinate axes, red, green, and blue. And that's way more. You see, that's a huge number. And in principle, you can also have 32. But that's the meaning of those numbers. So you can create any color with a combination of red, green, and blue. So really picture that as a coordinate system where X, Y, and Z corresponds to red, green, and blue. But it's not continuous values. It's values that go from 0 to 255 in steps of integer numbers. So it's kind of quantized. So therefore, every color corresponds to one of those little cubelets in our coordinate system. So therefore, colors are just encoded as numbers. So there's no concept of color for our neural network. It just sees those different channels with the different pixel values. And of course, then it tries to extract relevant information. And I kind of showed you already how in principle it could work by just using these different color channels. So let us go back to our slides and let's take a closer look. So we have our image here, and we also discussed about size. So it has a certain number of rows and a certain number of columns. In our case, it has 3 different channels, RGB. And when you display those different channels, first of all, the color map is arbitrary because it's just pixel values. There is no such concept of color. But of course, you can have different features being highlighted in the different color channels. So if I say color has no concept, or there's no concept of color, it sounds a bit weird, but just think about, instead of having visible light, just having X-rays, for example. Then you have the energy of the X-rays in electron volt. Then you bin them in different bins of energy, and this is completely arbitrary, and you still have to display this somehow. And of course, we cannot see any color like 100 keV or 100 EV, so we can't do that. For us, that's not a color. But still, of course, you have this energy range of your photons, so you can still create an image in this energy range, and this is your color channel. So therefore, that's what I mean if I say there's no concept of color in that sense. It's only pixel values, and it really depends on the actual channel, like energy channel, energy values of your photons. So this is what it really is. And again, you can extract different features from the different channels, depending on which light of which energy they actually reflecting. Okay, so we know how to read and display those images in Python. And now we want to create our, now we want to create a function. We want to call it myConvolution. And in this function, we want to now have an image as an optional input argument, and then we want to display this image, and we want to apply convolution to this image. And of course, in Python, you have a convolution library, so you don't need to write it from scratch. Of course, we're going to do this at some point because we really want to create our own convolution routine that you understand what it actually does. But for now, we want to use the library, the internal library in Python. And then we want to call this image, display the original image. And then we also want to apply some of those convolution filters and then take a look at the resulting image after we have applied the convolution to all those images. And we want to use particular convolution kernel. So we want to use those kind of standard convolution kernel you, for example, find on Wikipedia or so, which have a size 3×3, so they're relatively small and they're easy to implement. And we want to just see what the result is. So we have these different convolution kernels, up to 13 different kernels, and we want to also put them in one array. And then we want to apply those different kernels to the different images. And we also want to do this for the different color channels. So not only for, so we want to apply every convolution filter for every color channel. And therefore we want to use the function convolution in Python. So where the input argument is just the image with the corresponding color channel and also the particular convolution filter. And we want to do this with all the filters and with all the different color channels so that we create plot or a figure with different subplots according to the different convolution filter. And we want to have these subplots for every different color channel. And then we're going to take a look and try to understand and interpret the result. So that's the idea now. So we want to create such a plot with where the image has been convolved with every different filter, and we want to do this for every different channel. So then, of course, we want to test the code. So let's do that, and let's go therefore back to our user interface. So let me just navigate back. And now we want to create our code. So therefore, let us also add a new chapter. And therefore, let's create a new folder, and so if you start counting from the first lecture, that's chapter number 9. And I would call it convolution. And of course, we want to navigate to this folder. So we go back to Spider, go to work, and want to write the code in this particular folder so that depending on the progress and depending on the topic, you have corresponding folders and you can always go back and forth. So let us now create this image, create this code. So we create a new script. And what do we need? Of course, we need NumPy and we need matplotlib. And for the convolution part, we need SciPy. So we just say from SciPy, and it's in the library signal. And then we import convolve. So if you don't have SciPy, just pip install SciPy and it will run for a minute or so, half a minute, and then you have SciPy installed. And then we call it sconv, and this will create our convolved image. So we call these libraries first, and then we want to create our code where we take an image, then apply all these convolution filters, create a plot, and do this for all the different color channels, and then that we get a feeling about what it actually does and how it works and what it looks like. So we define our new function and just call it my_convolution. And we want to, for example, have an image as an optional input argument. So for example, if we just say if image, then it's been read as a tuple. So we just say for image in image because it's just one image. And then we just say plt imshow image. All right, so that would just plot the image. And if not, if we don't provide an image, for example, we can just say image equals, and then we can also use the image that we have here, just this kind of image here. So for example, we can just say, this is my path here. And then our image is just this image here. So that's, let's say, kind of our standard image if we do not provide an actual image as an input argument. And of course, we also want to show the image then. So let us actually test run this. Maybe we can do that by just using another value here. So we want to save and compile this code. So first of all, we're going to save it. So we just go to our folder here, save it under the name my convolution. And then of course we want to compile it. Let's test our code before we include the other before we include the actual convolution part. So if we just run my convolution, and let me also delete all those images here. So without providing an image, it should just show this particular image. And with providing our particular image here, which we just called I, then we should get our image I, of course. So if you convince yourself that your code works, then we can just move on to the actual convolution part. So where do we get those filters from? Yeah, so as I said, those are pretty standard filters. You in principle can find on Wikipedia, and you can just copy and paste those filters. So that would be just a very technical part. So we can just copy and paste those filters, and so that's the same thing I'm doing here as well. So we just set up those filters here, and in principle, this is our filter library. So let me also just quickly do that. And then we have our different filters. So there's some for enhancing edges, some for sharpening edges, some for blurring, and many other filters as well. So again, this is just a technical part. So just take any filters you can find, just copy and paste it from Wikipedia. So now, before we want to run the actual convolution, let's put all those filters in one particular array, and let's call this array just K. So K really stands for kernel, so that's why it's called K1 enumerated up to K13, and there's in Python this command npd stack, so we can just put it in an n-dimensional matrix if you wish, and then we just take all those different convolution filters, so it requires a tuple as an input of any size. So we just then write down K1, K2, and so on. So all those different filters. So we have our 13 filter. Let me also just quickly run that in the console, just in case there's a typo or so, if we get an error message. So let me just run this here. And then we have our array, which has all those filters, 3 times 3, and we have those 13 different filters. So now we want to just create these subplots. So there are a few parameters we're going to need. So first of all is the number of filters, so the number of kernel, and K is just K shape 2, because we're starting from 0. So that's the x coordinate, y coordinate, Z coordinate. So it's 2. We have 13 different filters. And then we also need the number of channels for our image, which is 3 if we have an RGB image. So we just say image shape number 2, because again, it's just the Z-axis, so to say. So, and now we want to run the convolution for all the different color channels and all the different filters. So we just take one channel, run the convolution through all the different filters, and these are going to be the subplots for one plot, and then we're going to do this for the next color channel and so on. So we can just start running this over a loop. So just an ordinary for loop. So just say for I in range number of channels. Because we could also in principle have more than 3 different channels. And then we want to create a subplot where every subplot corresponds to the convolved image of the different kernel. And then we have a figure with these different subplots. And how many subplots do we actually have? So when we want to arrange these subplots in an actual figure, we have to know how many subplots we have. And it should be an n times n. So we have to calculate the square root of the number of kernels, so to say, and k times to the power of 0.5, which is, of course, not necessarily an integer number. So we also have to round this. And we round this up, not down, because we want to have at least as many subplots as filter, so that we have for every filter subplot. If there's more space left, fine. Then there's just some space left, and which will be the case here because we have 13 different filters. So if you calculate the square root, it's not an integer number. So it would be 4 times 4, because then we have 16. We have 13 filters, so works. It's just 3 empty spaces, but we see all the different images. So that makes sense. So that's what we just call, I don't know, PS, for example. So we know how many subplots are we going to need. And now we want to run the actual convolution. So for k in range nk, so the number of kernel, we want to perform the convolution. So we want to now calculate or create, first of all, the subplots. And for the subplots, we have to give the grid, which is PS times PS. So in our case, 4 times 4. And then, of course, we have to enumerate this. And we have k, so we can enumerate this with k, but be careful, we start counting at 0, so it's k plus 1. And now we apply the actual convolution. So we just defined our convolution function with conv. So that's what we did here. So that's the convolution. And that's the internal function in Python. And we do this with our image. All rows, all columns, and one particular channel. This is our color channel here. And then we multiply this with our kernel. Again, all rows, all columns, the corresponding channel. So this is the channel of the kernel. So that's the actual kernel, the different kernels, and that's the color channel of our image. And it creates an output image. We just want to call out. And then we also want to display this image. So we can just say plot im show. And then we have our output image. And remember, there's no such concept of color in that sense. So we just can use any color map. And let's use gray again, because that's kind of unbiased. And of course, we want to, after we have all these subplots, want to create or want to show the plot before we open the next figure, so that we have 3 different figures. Each has 13 different subplots according to the different kernel. So that's actually it. And of course, there's some fine tuning. So let me also just shorten that a bit, because we also want to give the figure size. I want to give a subtitle. Then I want to also adjust the space a bit, font size and all of that. So that's a bit fine tuning. And now let's run our code. So let me just test our code. So first of all, when we don't have an argument, that should give us the convolution of this image here, of the black dog. So let's see. And here it is. So that's the first channel, and that's the other channel, and then you have the different convolution. So we see these different images here, different convolution image, and for the different color channels. And we also want to do this for the other one. So it displays the image and then also shows the convolution. So again, I want to zoom in a bit that you see the differences. And also want to go back to the PowerPoint for highlighting those differences in case you don't see it on the plot here. So let me just move to the PowerPoint. So then we have our code that creates those images. So that's the first color channel, which is red usually. Then you have those different results, and you can tell, right? So here, for example, the edges are highlighted here as well. Then you have these different color channels. So this is for the second color channel. This is green, and then you have for the blue color channel. And then you can also see, for example, here that the background objects are kind of blurred away. But what you see here is the foreground object that's enhanced, or the object here, which is our dog, which is enhanced. So you kind of see how the standard filter already work. And again, keep in mind, the neural network will not use standard filter. So we will start with random filter values, and it will figure it out by itself. It will figure out which features are important for having a proper classification according to gradient descent. So it will be still the optimization. We're going to use gradient descent as before. And according to that, it will figure out which features are important, and therefore which weights and which filters are the most applicable ones that we can use for having the best performance. So if there's no typo, like in this case, or hopefully also in your case, so our code has worked perfectly. If you have typos, or if you don't get along with your code, of course, you can always copy and paste it from my GitHub repository and really play a bit of the code, and also just, for example, use different convolution filter. Just make up different filter and play a bit with that you have an idea what it looks like really if you have a convolved image then. However, we just use the internal Python library convolution, but now in the next step, we want to create our own convolution routine. So we want to now go away from this automated version by actually writing a code that performs convolution. So we want to write our own convolution routine. And therefore, we also want to use we also want to create a routine or a code where we have, of course, the image as an input, but also the stride length and the padding. And we want to play a bit with those different settings with different stride length and different padding. And the output argument is, of course, the convolved image, and we want to take a look at the result. Again, that we get a feeling about what stride actually means, what is the effect of different stride length and different padding, the resulting image. And once this code is working, so if we, of course, we're going to test this code, then we can actually use it as a first part of our convolution neural network. And we can copy and paste the code, put into our ANN, and set up a new class, and we will call this class convolution. And it is important, especially for backpropagation, that we really understand how convolution works. That will be our forward part. So that's the reason why kind of insisting writing this manually step by step, because then it really helps to understand backpropagation. So this is the idea for the next chapter. So we want to create our own convolution routine, and we want to call it convolution self-made.